What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Christ in Capital, the show that wants to encourage you to love God, love neighbor, and build something. I'm the host, Dustin Johnson, and this is going to be a fantastic episode. Again, with me, I have Nathan Johnson. Nathan, what's up?
Hey, Dustin. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Yep, I'm ready to do this. You talked about this a couple weeks ago, or you kind of hinted at it, and it was kind of a shock to me because... Well, just because I'm so familiar with this person and you seem to think that this person was like a demon or something. So, which after doing my research, may be a little closer to that too. Anyways, we're going to be talking about Ayn Rand today. And just to kind of set this up, in the past, Nathan and I have talked a lot about socialism and communism and the philosophies that kind of undergirded the economic systems of the 20th century. And kind of how collectivism, like what's wrong with collectivism, you know, we talked about, quote, the madness of crowds, so to speak. But I think we're going in basically the exact opposite direction today. And we're going to be talking about Ayn Rand. Nathan, who is Ayn Rand? What was her shtick?
So in a nutshell, because... we could go on for a long time about who is Ayn Rand. But in a nutshell, she was a philosopher, really, who wrote about a lot of different things around her theory of objectivism, which is basically an all-encompassing philosophy of metaphysics and ethics and political philosophy and physics. And yet she's most known for her political and ethical philosophy. So when we talk about Ayn Rand, typically nowadays we're really emphasizing the stuff that she said in The Fountainhead and in Atlas Shrugged, yep, and The Virtue of Selfishness. And in those, she emphasized ideas that have later been picked up and championed by the libertarian movement, an emphasis on free markets and individualism as the basis of society, which is really fundamentally built on her ethical claims that what is good or what is ethical is the pursuit of self-interest.
Yeah.
So she did not believe in God. She was fundamentally a materialist. Mm-hmm. And in her view, what makes something good is that it preserves a person's life and it leads to their happiness. And so everyone has a moral, ethical obligation to preserve their life at all costs and to make choices that lead to their own happiness.
Yeah.
Now, I want to couch that because what she didn't say was, therefore, you can do whatever you want in order to lead to what you think will make you happy. She very much was against the use of force against anyone else to bring about what you think would make you happy.
Yeah.
Because she did come to the conclusion that if you harm another person, that's not going to lead to your own happiness. But she wouldn't say that there is some sort of transcendent moral order that would say hurting someone else is wrong.
Right. She would say that hurting someone else is actually hurting you, or it's not in your self-interest to hurt someone else. And I don't know if she would get to like a whole like universal utilitarianism. She would back it that way, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Like it's not because there's an obligation; it's because ultimately that's what you want. For lack of better example.
Yeah. And so her conclusion on a societal and political level would essentially be that every individual should be after their own self-interest. And as a byproduct, if you're doing that in a political system that allows you to do that, then everybody will benefit.
Yeah.
Now, you're not pursuing your own self-interest so that the collective benefits. It just so happens that the collective will benefit when everyone pursues their self-interest without harming another person. So you can already kind of, if you're kind of steeped in the libertarian ideology, you can see how this leads to libertarianism, which is essentially asserting that the government's there to protect people's rights, and that everyone should basically do what they want as long as they don't infringe on the rights of the people. And then if we do that in a free market economic system, then we will thrive.
Yeah, that's what kind of warmed me up to Ayn Rand at first. I have never like personally been acquainted, well, obviously not with her, but with her work. Like I've read a little bit of Atlas Shrugged, but I haven't like dug deep into her stuff. But a lot of libertarians are really into Ayn Rand because of the way that, or at least the way that I saw it was, her philosophy is so like paralleled and so kind of married with, I guess, this like idea of capitalism, free market capitalism. And even I on the show talk about how like your technically your self-interest in a free market should ultimately lead to someone else's benefit, because if there's a free exchange of goods and services, you can see kind of the parallels there. You can see like the similarities between that.
Right.
But you get into her like away from her like economic stuff and into her like social philosophy, and she says things like altruism is evil, she highlights the idea that every dictator and every mass murderer or like Hitler and Stalin, all them, they were acting out of altruism, or what they thought was altruistic. So she'll highlight that as like an example of why you shouldn't pursue altruism. And I'm like, wow. I mean, like, so I don't know. It just seems so foreign to me, and maybe it's just because I'm in like a Christian context, that I just think that that's kind of like odd, and I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I similar to you. I had never read Ayn Rand, but I was like, yeah, it seems like she's got some good ideas. Sounds kind of conservative, at least like economically conservative.
A little bit.
But then I met somebody who was a full-blown Ayn Randian.
Mm-hmm.
And it was chilling. We had this long conversation about ethics, and he was saying that the most morally reprehensible thing is self-sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly.
And it really, I mean, it seemed contradictory to even our own natural human tendencies, to love those people close to us, to sacrifice. And then, of course, as a Christian, it just really seems antithetical to the Christian faith.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to something, and she was saying that, she said altruism was evil, and she highlighted those dictators and stuff like that. But just her idea that, that acting in someone else's best interest, like I wasn't making that connection. Her, like, acting in someone else's best interest was I don't know, just not allowed in her world. But I kind of want to go off on a little not a tangent, but I want to go off in a direction and ask you a question. She has this idea of acting in your self-interest, and you should want to do these certain things, and you should, acting in your self-interest will act to the benefit of everyone else. What about Piper's Christian hedonism, where is there a parallel here? I'm not equating John Piper with
Right.
Ayn Rand, but there's this sense in which you do things because they are in your best interest, because you get joy from it, right? Because you've been made new, and your joy is in the glorification of God and all of these things. That sounds somewhat similar, but kind of the opposite side of the coin, it seems like.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I've been thinking about this for a while. If altruism is even possible, and if altruism is possible, whether or not it's actually a Christian virtue. And and so this kind of ties into your question, because when you look at the New Testament and the Old Testament, actually, especially the Old Testament, but even the New Testament, there is a lot of conversation around rewards or benefiting from doing right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily a, hey, if you love God and neighbor, you'll get a bunch of stuff in this life.
Right.
But it is, I mean, Jesus talks about that our good deeds will be rewarded in heaven, and that we are supposed to do good works, not in the eyes of man to get rewards from man, but in the eyes of God, and God will reward us for those things.
Right.
And Paul talks about the great joy that he has in suffering for the sake of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And, as you were saying with Piper, God is most glorified in us, we're most satisfied in him. So human satisfaction is something that we seek by actually setting aside our personal interests.
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
I think you could say that what Christianity offers is not a vision of altruism if you define altruism as setting aside your self-interest and only looking at the interests of others. If that's how you define altruism, then I don't think that's necessarily a Christian principle. And I'm not even sure if that's possible in a society.
Yeah.
But what Christianity offers is a vision of that's multi-layered and complex, where essentially it's saying, the scripture says, do not only look after your own interests, but also look after the interests of others. It says, love your neighbor as you love yourself, right?
Yeah.
It says, consider others more significant than yourselves. Outdo one another's in showing honor to other people. There's obviously the vision of, greater love has no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's the radical call of the gospel to die to self in order to live to Christ.
Yeah.
So there is this vision of thinking about the good of other people, thinking about the will of God, sacrificing your own interests for the sake of the Lord or for the sake of other people. But then there's this undercurrent, which all of those things will lead you to greater long-term joy, even if it's short-term pain. It will lead you to a greater, deeper relationship with God, a better relationship with your fellow man, and then ultimately the blessings that God will give you in the new heavens and the new earth.
Mm-hmm.
So God is not asking us to put aside our love of self or our interests in ourself,
Right.
but to add to it and to pursue even more fundamentally the glory of God, the good of other people.
Yeah. Like if you can look out into the future and take a momentary sacrifice. I mean we're called to do that for the betterment, for the glorification of God, for the betterment of others. Yeah. And then I even heard, going back to Ayn Rand, I even heard she was asked a question about love and like getting married and loving someone. And it was like, basically what she was saying was, you don't love someone unless they're earning it. Like, unless they're like, done something or they're providing some sort of value to you. Like I love my wife, not unconditionally. I love her because she's, pretty, or because she gives me children, or because she, and it's just, I don't know. I just thought it was really foreign to me. And that's not the side of Ayn Rand that I knew. I just knew the capitalism side of Ayn Rand, and I'm like, oh, it makes pretty good sense. But then I look at this and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can go all the way down that rabbit trail.
Right. And I think it's important to recognize that while some of these principles might work in the economic sphere, in terms of when you're deciding kind of spend your money, if the only two options are you decide for yourself how you're going to spend the money, or the government decides how you're going to spend your money, through taxes, and then your government spending that money on what they think is right.
Yeah.
If those are your two options, then Rand's system makes sense in terms of an economy is going to work a lot easier when free exchange and goods and services are in the hands of individuals
Yes.
and not in the hands of the government. But that's a far cry from an entire societal system being based upon individualism and pursuing your own interests, which is really my rub with libertarianism, is not that they don't have some good economic policies of free markets, but
how does that bake into your social and philosophical? Like if you carry that over just one for one, you're gonna set up a society that is not, I think, is not suited for the flourishing of people, in my opinion.
Right. Exactly. And the reality is, people make decisions all the time in regards to their money or the things that they produce, not simply with the thought of how do I make more money or how do I produce more, but what's best for my family, or what do I want out of my social life, or what money do I want to give away to other things?
Yeah.
Nobody. This is why you can't simply think in terms of economics when you start asking questions about the way society should function,
right,
or even the way money should be conceived of. Is because there are a lot of different factors that go into each decision that a person makes.
Yep. You said it on the very first episode you were on, that economics is first and foremost a social thing.
Right.
Because you're talking about the interrelationships that people have with one another. That's all the dollar is an exchange of something, right, of value. Mm-hmm. What do you value? Well, you can get into that. You can get into what's the framework, what's the kind of groundwork for setting up free exchange. Like, there's a lot of social aspects to it. But I think, like you're saying, the Libertarian Party or the libertarians think transactionally. It's just, capitalism works. And then I even see some of them trying to carry that over into like social stuff, like Ayn Rand, like what we're talking about right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And this is my rub that leads me to be more classically conservative than classically libertarian, is that I really do think that the fundamental unit of society is the family, and that society is built off of certain enduring institutions, not simply individuals acting in their own personal interest and defending their own personal rights. Mm-hmm. That I think that in order for a society to really function and not just be torn apart, as everyone's kind of seeking what they in the moment think is best for themselves, you need certain institutions and certain values and certain expectations or obligations that are bigger than the individual, but do not come top down from the government. They come from bottom up, from the traditions, from the religion, from the shared stories of the culture, from a sense of communal identity. And all of those things, what it does is it creates bonds of love and bonds of obligation, mm-hmm. that end up directing people's actions such that, yes, they are seeking to benefit themselves, but they really are also trying to benefit their neighbor, or benefit their community, benefit their family.
Yeah. They're actively trying to. They're not disregarding that aspect of it. Whereas I think Rand would say that, self-interest, alone should be the principle that kind of governs society. Yeah, I think that's a good way to like encapsulate it. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Just an interesting thought. Like I just, at a cursory glance and kind of hearing about her philosophy in the realms of economics, I was like, yeah, sure, why not? But then for this episode, I was going in and listening to some of her stuff, and I'm like, wow, what have I latched onto? So Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, if your listeners are looking for any books to provide a kind of a conservative, not necessarily a conservative response to Rand or libertarianism, but definitely a conservative alternative to libertarianism, there are a couple people that they might want to pick up and read. Edmund Burke is kind of the classic conservative. So anything that he wrote would be interesting to read. More modern people, Roger Scruton, I think, would be a really good person to read. He actually has a book called Conservatism, which is a good place to start, and he does a good job of showing the differences between classical conservatism and classical libertarianism, and why, while there is some overlap, why conservatism is a much more enduring thing.
Yeah.
But then there's also a concept called distributism, which came around in the kind of the late 19th, early 20th centuries, that basically tried to pave a middle road between laissez-faire capitalism and socialism. And there's some G.K. Chesterton has some stuff on it, Hilaire Belloc and some others. I'm not totally convinced about distributism, but it's also kind of an interesting approach to economics and social theory that kind of tries to pave a middle way.
Okay. In between the classical conservatism and classical libertarianism?
Well, it's really in between socialism
gotcha.
and libertarianism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That might be next on my reading list. All of your suggestions for me have been awesome. But okay, so just to round out this episode, I told you I was going to ask you this. Ayn Rand, self-interest should be the thing that motivates us, economics and philosophy and, our motivations. Christ, in the Gospels, it says that Christ went to the cross for the joy that was set before him. Okay, is that self-interest? What do you think? What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Strictly speaking, yes. God does not do anything that is not in his self-interest.
Okay.
But it's not a dichotomy. It's not self-interest as against the benefit of the rest of humanity. In fact, with God, what is in his best interest is always in humanity's best interest.
Yeah.
And so Christ was seeking the joy set before him and the glory that would be gained through his death on the cross, and the joy of the union with the church that he would get. But also he did it because he loved us, and because we would benefit from that too.
Yep. Awesome. Perfect. Another good one in the books. I'll tag those couple of notes, or those couple of books that you suggested. Anything else going on that listeners should know about on your end? Do you have that stuff up on New College's website? Or
no, well, I don't have any of my own writings on New College's website, but if people are interested in what New College is all about, I would encourage them to go to the website and check it out. It's a pretty great college.
Yeah. Yep. If you're a parent listening to this and your kid's about to go to college, you know where to go.
You know where to go.
All right, man. Well, thanks again, and we'll keep in touch. Next episode, or maybe the episode after that, we'll have something else to talk about. All right, everybody, you heard it. Act in self-interest, but your self-interest should be for the interest of others. That's what we like to talk about in this podcast. Everything related to economics. You should be loving God, loving neighbor, and going out and building something. Talk to you guys later. Bye.